welcome to the Ghosts of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm Mackelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 124 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin. Today we'll be discussing chapter 50 of A Clash of Kings, that's Theon 4.
Chapter 50, we're making our way. I think my audiobook says we're 76% of the way through, and that includes the appendices, which we won't be discussing. Anyway, as always, we'll chat about the chapter and try not to spoil any future plot points for you, and hopefully we'll provide you with some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the television show, indulge in a little pedantry, and cover some relevant news and listener correspondence. Be sure to check out the show notes, they'll provide you some additional information that will be particularly helpful if you're not reading along. How are you, Mackelly?
I'm doing well. You know, Carson's rule about thunder in the winter means snow within 10 days. Held true.
Did it?
Yeah.
I remember the snow, but I didn't remember the thunder in advance of the snow.
At least we heard some. Penny certainly did. She was hiding in the in Molly's bathtub. That's where she goes when she hears thunder. And sure enough, it went from 2 days ago I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt walking the dog, and yesterday it was snowing. So
yeah, it did. It snowed quite a bit.
Yeah,
exciting. We're at the beginning of this is our first episode of 2022, right?
That's right. It is indeed. Yes. How are you?
Happy New Year to you.
As the same to you. I haven't
I'm
asked.
okay.
You. Yeah. I'm
okay. I discovered that you published an episode without consulting me.
I did,
which was rather exciting.
Our outtakes, the last episode of 2021.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know my singing was going to make it to. I would have practiced a bit harder.
Anything you put on these airwaves has a chance.
My brother Rob is getting married.
Oh wow! Congratulations, Rob. I saw that on the show notes. I wondered if maybe you meant Rob was marrying a Frey.
No, I see what you mean. Yes, no, my brother Rob.
Yes.
It is always reminds me to get my taxes done when Rob announces he's getting married, because usually that's the reason. I'm being mean.
You're an older brother. You're expected to be mean.
I wish Rob and Sophie all the best.
Absolutely.
They're a great couple, and I wish them well.
So what did you think of the outtakes? Did they make you chuckle?
Of course they make me chuckle. I mean, everything we do makes me chuckle. But yeah, I enjoyed them.
I put out on our social media pages, which made you laugh harder, Simon singing or my inability to pronounce half hand?
Half hand. And what I said about that was you just, in that episode where you said half hand, you'd just been talking about Molly playing an old lady in a play.
Yes.
And so I commented on that. You sounded like Molly. Half hand.
Half hand. Yeah, although me saying that Bran was quilting in the yard sure got a pretty ruckus laugh from us.
Do you remember what you were supposed to say? Was it like tilting at the quatrain or something?
Yes,
like
that's exactly what it was. I said he was quilting. That still makes me laugh. Oh, good stuff. Anyway, hopefully you've gotten a chance to check it out. If you haven't yet, go check out our outtakes. They're pretty fun.
We've just summarised them for you there. That's the best of them. Those are the highlights.
So yes, beginning of 2022. So let's get off to a good show here.
Yeah, let's go down to business. Where was Theon last we heard of him? So last we saw of Theon, he was capturing Winterfell by drawing Sir Roderick Cassel out to defend Torrance Square. His reign as Lord of Winterfell began inauspiciously when the smith Mickon is murdered in front of everyone, and the kennel master's daughter Palla is abused by the Ironborn. Reek and Osha, the wildling, at least seemed keen to switch sides to Team Theon. Mackelly, why don't we give them the summary of this one?
All right. Theon wakes suddenly and can't decide if a sound or his dream stirred him. He leaves Kyra, a local girl, in bed while he goes to the window. He's grimly pleased to be bedding the girl in Ned's own chambers. He relishes the insult to the straight-laced former owner. The night air is cool, but all is quiet. He returns to bed, stepping over his squire Wex.
Dawns on him that the silence is the problem. The direwolves have been howling incessantly since the fall of Winterfell, but they're quiet now. He jumps up and sends his guard Urzen to check on the direwolves in the Godswood, and sends Wex to check that Bran and Rickon are where they ought to be. First to return is Wex. The princes are gone. Theon dresses hurriedly. Urzen then returns and unsurprisingly reports that the wolves are gone too.
Mm-hmm. Once again, the occupants of Winterfell are ordered to gather up before their new lord. Theon wants to see who is missing. While the people are being roused from their beds, Theon and company find where the escape happened. Squint and Drennan were guarding the Hunter's Gate. Both are dead, the former floating in the moat, with clear signs that he was mauled by Summer and Shaggy. The latter is in the guardhouse with his pants down and a slit throat just below his smiling face.
Theon returns to the main yard where Reek reveals that Osha, Hodor, and the Reeds are all missing too. Theon recognizes Osha's handiwork in the murder of Drennan. The wildling has no morals and lies with impunity. Nobody will provide any help to Theon. Reek suggests using his old master's technique of flaying a few of them. Theon takes the opportunity to ingratiate himself by announcing that there will be no flaying while he's Lord of Winterfell.
How benevolent. No horses have been stolen, so Theon reckons that they can wait for daylight before chasing the fugitives. He rounds up a few volunteers of various levels of willingness, from Walder Frey, who's keen on the idea of hunting humans, to Farland the Kennelmaster, who's coerced by further threats to his daughter. Maester Luwin is also invited.
As they ride, the hounds have no trouble following the wolves' trail. Luwin takes the opportunity to sue for clemency with Theon. Greyjoy reassures Luwin that the boys are worth more to him alive than dead, and that so long as he doesn't fight, Hodor will be spared too. Even the Reeds he agrees to spare, but he does intend to kill Osha, and Luwin is fine with that, calling her an oathbreaker.
They find a deer that has been killed by the wolves, and Theon is a bit surprised that the humans didn't at least partially butcher the carcass. He presumes Osha is too afraid to light a fire. They reach a stream, and the hounds lose the scent. They notice a lack of Hodor's heavy footprint in the soft mud, and realize that they've been tricked. The wolves were alone, and the humans have peeled off somewhere else.
The force splits into three. One group goes upstream, one down, and one backtracks to find the branch point. None of them are successful. The three parties reconvene, and Theon is wroth with all. Reek says that he has a hunch where they might be hiding. There is a mill nearby Winterfell, where Sir Roderick paused when Reek was being brought to Winterfell. The miller's wife had several children, whom Cassel played with. Reek shows Theon what he's brought along with him: furs and wool and a wolf's head brooch. Theon picks up what Reek is putting down and sends the rest of the party back to Winterfell.
Oh boy, that Theon, I tell you what, he's quite the character.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of what we, more of the same from Theon in many ways. He's simultaneously loving being the Lord of Winterfell, but he's sort of like oppressed by it because he's having to be horrible to people who he likes and who kind of liked him. I don't think anyone loved Theon, but they saw him grow up from a little boy. They have a fondness for him.
Sure, they did anyway.
They did, exactly, and he's burning all of that. And so, Is the problem? As you know, I've been watching Breaking Bad, and it seems to me the problem with sort of like being a bad guy. If you're a successful bad guy, you become rich and sort of like powerful, and what's there to show for it? Nobody likes you anymore. Maybe
what's all
that's
that money worth?
Maybe it's my need to be loved coming through. I don't understand bad guys.
What's the point of all that wealth and power if you don't have friends to share it with?
Right. That's why we make this podcast. We scrupulously avoid wealth and power whilst garnering friends.
That's right. We are wealthy in other ways.
Exactly.
More important ways.
Mm-hmm. So Theon likes the fact that he's despoiling the Stark marital bed. It's not exactly the worst thing he's done recently or on the long term, but it is emblematic of his nastiness and how he feels towards the Starks. But again, I still feel some of it is kind of like he's trying to be like that.
Yes.
He actually was kind of fond of Ned and Cat.
He was, yeah. At least he outwardly said so while he was with them.
Yeah.
But so he is, as you said, despoiling the Stark marital bed with a young girl named Kyra, who I believe he mentions is 18. And this is actually the second time we've seen Kyra.
Oh, really?
Theon called out to her on their way through the winter town when Bran was taking Dancer out for a ride. Is the chapter where they met Osha in the Wolfswood.
Interesting.
As they were riding through the winter town, he called out to her, and then he said some things to Robb, and Robb was like, "Shh, not in front of Bran.
Okay.
Don't say inappropriate things in front of Bran."
So did the inappropriate things he said suggest that he was already in a relationship with her, or?
Well, that he had been intimate with her anyway.
Relations,
yes. Yes,
I see.
Exactly. They very much did.
Well, that's interesting, actually, because that then gives a slightly different... Because the book, this chapter, I didn't realise Kyra was a returning character, mentions that she was keen to come to Theon's bed, and I was like, it's interesting that he's got one fan, but apparently it was an old friend, you know?
Right, an old friend. Yes, that he hasn't spurned yet, like he has pretty much all of his other friends. Right. But like you're saying, throughout all of Theon's POVs, we see such mixed feelings and emotions about Ned. Like you said, he seems to want to rule like Ned. He often mentions that he will rule like Ned, or he's going to do something like Ned did something. But he also frequently wants to tear Ned down, like he does here, kind of taking pleasure in the fact of bedding as he puts it, a common tavern wench in Ned's bed. And so like when the wolves go missing, he thinks to himself, I must be cold and deliberate as Lord Eddard. He's channeling his Lord Eddard. He wants to be like Lord Eddard. And he's made comments like way back in Cat 3 when she discovered when it was the chapter with the attack by the cat's paw on Bran.
Okay.
And then, she woke up and she told Roderick, Robb, and Theon about her idea that it had to have been the Lannisters involved. And he says Lord Eddard is like a second father to me when they're having this conversation. So, in some ways he really wants to be like Ned. In other ways, he really wants to take jabs at Ned.
Having now met Balon Greyjoy since that scene, being a second father to him is not really that high of an honor. Right. He's like a second father to me. He's malicious, awful, horrible.
Yes. No, that's a good point right there.
And he also, I mean, you're making good points. He also wants to rule like Ned does, but he does the exact opposite of what Ned does in almost all circumstances.
He does.
He uses violence and threats and blames the victims for having to kill the people, which is,
Right. Yeah, he says things like he's protecting them. He often, in this chapter, talks to these people like he's protecting them from something or someone, but it's him that has brought all of the problems that he now has to, in quotes, protect them from. So, but mixed emotions are probably not too uncommon when you're dealing with a father figure who sets at the same time such a lofty standard and also expects you to uphold that standard when maybe your nature isn't necessarily to be able to do that, So,
So, going back to Jojen's green dream before all this happened, he dreamt of the sea coming to Winterfell, and in it 3 people died, but only 2 of them died in the previous chapter. That was Mickon and Alebelly, and sure enough, they did die. But Septon Chael died in the dream, but was hale and hearty when we left him. But now we learned that he was pushed down the well after, which I've got to say, why, if you're going to live there, why would you push someone down the well? I mean, his body's going to rot down there and pollute the water.
Solid point. Especially if you're afraid that you might be, surrounded and besieged. Why would you want to gum up one of your wells?
Yeah,
that could be an important thing.
I think that's a key part. Winterfell must have multiple wells because it's so huge.
I guess, yeah, probably does. But
still,
but you make a good point. Why would you? There's got to be other places you could have sacrificed him to the drowned god. Like I'm sure in the stables there was, what are those things called?
Yeah, one of those trench bucket.
Trough
A
of water. Yeah. Yes, that's the word. I'm sure there was a trough they could have drowned him in.
Listeners, that wasn't in the notes.
If it's not in the notes, we might hem and haw a bit.
So I noticed that Theon's being guarded. The door to Ned's chambers is Ned's chambers. It's always going to be Ned's chambers. Doesn't matter how many people take over Winterfell. They're Ned's chambers.
Like Tyrion said, Stark will always be the Lord of Winterfell, Theon.
So Theon's being guarded by Erzin. But that's interesting because he doesn't have enough men to guard the walls. So having to guard the walls himself and the princes, basically he had to leave one of these free, and that's how the princes got away. They couldn't have Ironborn on every door. And so... Yeah.
His logic is solid. I mean, you would want someone guarding you, because you're not the most favorite in this castle now.
You are detestable.
Yes. And you need someone guarding the walls, and the boys are little boys. One of them is a paraplegic. Right. So, his logic makes sense. But you had mentioned, I think it was the last Bran chapter, of only manning the inner walls due to the shortage of people, which is exactly what he did. He felt like it was too risky to put his men on the other side of the moat from him, in case there was a uprising in the castle.
But I still think it's tactically wrong to guard the inner wall. I know the inner wall is taller, so it sees over the outer wall, but you must have a better view of the outside from the outer wall.
Absolutely. So there's only a 20-foot difference. There's still 80 feet down to the ground.
Right. A lot of things could sneak up on you if you're not on that outer wall. So I still think it's a little bit tactically weird. But that goes to how afraid he is of what could happen inside the walls of Winterfell. He wants his men where they can reach him quickly.
His men are very spread very thin on those walls. He mentions
they must be working a lot of hours to keep manning everything. I mean, if they've got 2 on every gate,
Yeah, so he says they've got 4 at the main gate, and then 6, including Squint, so now they're down to 5, walking the walls. And he also mentions that there's significantly more turrets than men. And considering the background of the last Bran chapter, when I talked about the gates and the size of the castle and stuff, it's possible. It's basically like not having anybody on the walls. Right. I mean, you're looking at possibly like a 1-to-1 ratio between people and miles that they're responsible for along the wall.
This is the point I'm trying to make. Given how thin they are, they might as well put 4 guys on the outer walls and just say, you look north, you look south, you look east, you look west. Right.
Yeah, and absolutely.
Send up a firing arrow if you see something, and we'll come running.
Now he does mention early in this chapter he thinks, I don't have enough men, and he wonders if Stig has made it to Deepwood Motte yet, with news of what he's done here at Winterfell. And with the request, or maybe a command, depending on how he worded it, of Osha to come from Deepwood Motte with reinforcements to help him hold this castle.
But do you think she'll come? I mean, Theon's gone off book here, and I'm not saying that Ironborn are sticklers for the rules, but she might not see anything in it for her and her men.
Oh yeah, absolutely. On one hand, she probably doesn't like the idea of him trying to show her up by going off book and trying to take the heart of the North. And on the other hand, he would be out of her hair if she just let this castle fall and him be killed. And they wouldn't lose that many men.
No,
they're down to like 28 now. They sent Stig off, so they're down to like 27 men now.
Stig arrives, he says, do you want to come to Winterfell or can I just join your group?
Right.
So when they get to the scene of the escape, Theon does show that he's fairly smart. He puts the pieces of the scene together quite well from the scraps of information.
He notices that there's 2 cups in the gatehouse, and then Drennan's compromised position. That doesn't exactly take Sherlock-like deductions here. His pants were around his knees. There were...
Honestly, though, that could have happened with only one cup present. The second cup is actually helpful for this deduction, if you ask me.
I guess, yeah, that's a good point. He does spot the hastily wiped blood on the crenellation, and that's how he discovers where Squint was killed, because they find Squint floating in the moat.
Right.
And then he realizes what's happened, and he goes up onto the crenellation, sees that there's blood there, and realizes, oh, here's what happened. He was up on the wall. He heard the gate go down, went to go see what was happening, was attacked by the wolves, and then they pushed him over.
Or he may have jumped to try and get away from them, to be honest.
Maybe. And then later he notices that the elk only had wolf bites taken out of it, no stakes cut from it, which he thought was odd, because even if Osha was afraid to light a fire, she still should have taken some elk steaks for later.
Yeah, that was an interesting spot. And of course, given what we now know happens for the rest of the chapter, we realise why this was. It was because the wolves were all on their own. She should have given them more specific instructions. If you kill an elk between here and the river, I want you to take this knife and then saw a bit off to make it look like we were with you.
Yes.
But yeah, Theon's quite clever, and it's a shame he's misdirecting that cleverness.
Yeah. Between him and Wex, noticing that Hodor's footprints are missing from the soft mud, they've got a real, like, Holmes and Watson vibe going on here. He needs to give up this lordship thing and become a detective.
Isn't it more like those two magicians? What are they called? Penn and Teller.
Yes, maybe. Yes, right, it is.
Because Wex doesn't talk. That was
right. Yes, I picked up what you were putting down.
Exactly.
Theon thinks that he should have killed the wolves the day that he took the castle, and it's one of many shouldas. Should have done somethings that he mentions or thinks about in this chapter. He thinks that he should have killed the wolves. He thinks he should not have trusted Osha. And he thinks he should have put guards on the Stark boys. There's one shouldn't that he maybe wanted to think about earlier, is maybe he shouldn't have tried to take and then hold an entire castle with 30 men. Yeah.
And especially, maybe this comes across more in the TV show, but I think it's been a background in the book that has been sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit, is the 30 men don't really respect him very much either.
True.
So I'm not sure they're going to fight to the death for him, sort of, especially if things start to go wrong. He's just lost 2 more men. If things get a little bit hairy for him, they might all go off and join Asha. And actually, by the way, they mention in this chapter, he feels like there's a Osha and Asha having similar names. He's like, they remind me of one another. They're always a pain in his backside.
Right. Which also explains why the TV show changed Asha's name to Yara, right? To make it a little less complicated. Yeah. But I was thinking, with so few men, we just discussed how few men are guarding these walls. You'd think Luwin would be able to get some ravens off, especially at night, unless they're spending a guard on him 24/7, because Theon doesn't trust him enough to leave him alone in the castle. He makes Luwin come with them on the hunt. So maybe he's spending some of his precious guard capital to make sure that Luwin doesn't get any.
But literally, what could he send? I mean, they've sent ravens out to announce this to the
Lannisters. They did, but they could get word out that how lightly it's held.
True.
The situation within the castle when he got those birds off I think it was the Bran chapter. When the actual storming of the castle was a Bran chapter. He got 2 ravens off. One was shot down. The other, I think, made it to or was at least sent to White Harbor. Right. It just said, "Hey, we're under attack." Right. You get more ravens off saying, "There's basically nobody in here."
Right.
This is being held together with, chewing gum and toothpicks.
Yeah.
I found it ironic that in this chapter, Theon thinks that his father thought only in terms of conquest, but what good was it to take a kingdom if you could not hold it? I thought that was quite ironic, as he is trying desperately to hang on to this castle with a skeleton crew that really has no chance of hanging on to this castle if any force comes to free it.
So Theon tells the castle citizens that Bran and Rickon have fled, and he wants help getting them back. Obviously, no one really jumps forward to do this. None of the original citizens of Winterfell, anyway. And well, I'm going to steal a point that you wrote down. If he was really committed to taking Winterfell, would he have killed Bran and Rickon? I mean, to be honest, keeping Bran and Rickon alive feels like a bargaining chip for when you lose Winterfell.
Yes, right. Yeah, if he really wanted to fully commit to this, he would need to kill those boys at some point, because as long as one Stark is living, he's never going to truly be the Prince of Winterfell, or whatever he called himself, the Prince of the North.
Of course, there is a short-term benefit in that it keeps the citizens in check, because they know that their princes are in Theon's clutches.
Yes.
And there is that medium-term benefit of when Robb Stark arrives with 50,000 men, you're going to want to have a bargaining chip. But you're right.
Absolutely.
For the long term, there's no benefit in keeping these two alive. You need them dead. You need them dead and every other Stark dead. Otherwise, you're dead.
Right. There's just... You're right. There's a catch-22 there. He could... Keeping the boys alive keeps him in the short term safe, because, because he could kill them if he's in danger. But as long as they're alive, he's never going to get what he wants. So, I mean, in this chapter alone, like Farland says, why would I care to hunt down my own trueborn lords? And Theon even thinks to himself, when he's thinking about the fact that the boys have escaped, the people of the North will never deny Ned Stark's sons, Robb's brothers. The whole North will rally around them, and they will, they will fight to be the ones that get to defend them.
Yeah.
So
there are logical consequences of that thought, which one of them should be, let's go home. Because
we should not be here. This was a bad idea.
The only thing I wondered, and this didn't get mentioned in the Tyrion chapter, but I wonder if one thought might be to marry Sansa.
Yeah.
Because that might...
It did.
If you married Sansa, then you could, become Lord of Winterfell, because there's still Stark blood in your children, kind of thing.
Right, and he does mention that he wishes Sansa or Arya were here, because then he could further cement his hold on the North by marrying Sansa.
But we don't think he said that to... Well, Tyrion received his letter from Balon, right?
Right, yes. So, along those lines, we know that the Lannisters have a plot to marry Joffrey to Marjorie Tyrell now, that they've sent Littlefinger off with a proposal for. So, if the Lannisters were to consider the Greyjoy alliance proposal that you just mentioned, that Balon sent Tyrion, would there be any sense to include some kind of alliance pact, this, marriage between Sansa and Theon? From the Lannister perspective, would there be any benefit to considering that?
Well, the benefit would be, conceivably, that the North might allow Theon to be their ruler if he married Sansa.
Yes.
That's the one benefit.
Sure.
It could stabilize the North.
I guess so. It could at least... it would... As long as Robb is alive, there's going to be contention.
Right.
But it might at least stay Robb's hand.
True. It might...
a lot longer.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like the only way to win the North is to eradicate the Starks, marry into them, or let it be the Starks. I mean, that's, from the Lannisters' perspective, that's the only three possibilities, I would think.
Right. I guess if Sansa was the only Stark left living,
Right.
it would be a benefit.
It would be a benefit. If Theon could somehow convince the Northerners that she was there willingly,
right,
and he was actually treating her well, and the children were being raised in the Stark tradition, maybe.
Yeah. But he's out. He has everybody out in the yard. He roused from their beds. Some of them don't even have clothes on, just blankets wrapped around them. And he tries to relate to them, to get them to give up what they know about the escape. Meanwhile, he's literally just threatened their lives, and he's got them up in the middle of the night. Some of them are sobbing, and now he wants to talk like old buddies commiserating about the fear of their boy's safety being lost out in the woods. And it goes over like a lead balloon.
Mm. So he changes tack then, of course, and then he's thinking to himself, they could have all been killed or all of the women raped if it wasn't for him holding back his men. He's doing all this for these ingrates. Poor Theon.
His delusion of why he should be accepted by these Winterfell small folk is really something to behold.
But it's also sort of like it's not consistent, because half the time he's thinking they'll never accept me, and then the other half the time he's thinking these ingrates aren't accepting me.
Yeah, he brought all the trouble in the first place. So when he says he's protecting them, he's only protecting them from what he brought to them. And yeah, he's committed the most treacherous act you can to his only friend. And the one he says in this chapter, the only Stark who ever treated me like a brother was Robb. And that's the same person that he has completely been a traitor to. And these people are aware of that. They watched him grow up as a brother to Robb, and now they see him trying to steal his kingdom. So,
he must realize that they hate him for this, and they've got every right to hate him for this.
Yeah, you're right. Somewhere in his subconscious, he's aware of it, because he thinks these people hate me. But yet, at the same time, he's like, why aren't they loving me? Why aren't they realizing what I'm doing for them?
So the boys and company are afoot. No horses are missing. So it does feel like that's a slightly strange plan here, because you could have got quite a long distance. You could have put some miles between you and Winterfell. But they didn't. Now, they did have this cunning plan of using the wolves to hide their tracks, yada, yada, yada. But,
yes, I'm with you on that. It seems like the plan was fairly well thought out and coordinated. There was multiple components to this master plan.
Perhaps there were horses waiting for them at the point where they branched off from the wolves.
Oh, yeah, that could be. There could have been another element that we're not aware of.
Not from within Winterfell, but from without,
Yeah. Because Rickon's 4, and yes, he is a Stark, so nearly a man grown, but his legs are only so long.
His legs are not a man's grown.
Right. But I thought that detail, the fact that there were no horses involved, at least not that we're aware of, I thought it probably should have struck Theon as a bit odd or suspicious, and he might have thought, something's going on here. I got to keep an eye out for something unusual, because this makes no sense. Why would they go out on foot?
Yeah.
But I think he was just too confident about his abilities to track them down to really think about anything like that.
Yeah. So one of the few people to volunteer to help hunt them down is little Walder Frey. It takes a lot to stand out as a cad in the amongst the people of Winterfell right now, but young Walder Frey has come up with the goods here. He has.
Yes, we assume that it's little Walder Frey. It's never actually stated.
Said it was little Walder, but maybe I just.
And it just said Walder Frey, and then they said his cousin. Cousin made a comment. So, but the way he disparages the Reeds, and later toward the end of this chapter, really makes you assume that it's Little Walder,
right.
because he's the one that did that earlier when the Reeds made their first appearance.
Yeah.
But so Theon, he recognized. It takes him a moment to recognize the boy, and at first I thought, well, how would he have recognized Little Walder? The Walders got there after Robb rode out, so why would he recognize him at all? But if you're wondering that same thing,
I wasn't until you brought it up, but now I am.
Well, Theon arrived at the Twins with the report from Brendan Blackfish Tully for Robb about the Lannisters' movements. So he was there when Cat went in to meet with Lord Walder Frey.
Right.
So it's very possible that he met the two that were going to be heading to Winterfell.
Yeah. Oh, well, they all look alike, right? The Freys have a certain look, so probably he recognized them as a Frey, you know. And,
Could be that too.
And probably guessed his first name was Walder, because it seems to be the name. You know?
There's about at least a 50-50 chance.
You a
that you got
Frey?
it right.
You Walder?
Walder?
So Reek is another one who joins sides, who does want to help Theon find the princes. He urges Theon to strip off their skins, the people of Winterfell, to get the information that they need. But what information do you need? They went out the door. Hodor's carrying Bran. They've got the direwolves with them. What are you going to tell them? I mean, what could you possibly extract from these people? Some of them might have helped. It's true.
Right. They're already out the door, so you can't foil the plot at this point.
Now,
so yeah,
if there were horses missing too, maybe, you know, which way did they go? But again, you follow them with your hounds. You know, I just don't see the point of terrorizing the people here. There's nothing to be gained.
Right. Yeah, and again, Theon thinks, he says, as you mentioned earlier, there will be no flaying of people in Winterfell, and he thinks that he's the only one protecting these people from the likes of Reek.
Right.
And he's hoping that people will realize this, but it's only because you put the danger there in the first place. Yeah. So once again, he's only looking at it from his own perspective, not from the larger perspective. Yeah. But then he mentions Reek as one of his own. He says he wants to bring some of his own men with him. And I thought that was noteworthy, considering he just met Reek. And especially after Osha seems to have broken her oath, which she made right after Reek made his. So maybe Reek has done some things to really prove to Theon that he's one of his.
Suggesting flaying his enemies, possibly one of them. So what... We have to be careful of a spoiler around the end of this chapter, because it's not crystal clear what the plan is. But Reek had a plan from the get-go here, which was to bring with him some fur cloaks with a wolf's head brooch. So
yes,
we'll leave it to you guys to think about what it might mean. But it's interesting that he thought of it before they ever set off.
He came prepared.
Right.
He didn't know what they were going to find when they got out there.
Right.
But some reason he brought wools and furs and a wolf head brooch. So it gets you wondering, did he know that this was going to happen? Did he know what the plan was in some way?
Well, the one thing I'll say is that it was always a contingency if they couldn't catch the boys. That's the thing. He never mentioned what was in his bag until they concluded, we've lost them. We don't know where they are.
That's true.
So it was always a backup plan for that. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So
we'll have to see.
When they ride out, Theon leaves the castle in the hands of Black Lauren, and he's told, "Do with it as you will if I don't return." So Black Lauren is not one of the nicer members of the Ironborn. So that's a reason for everyone to hope that Theon gets back safely.
In fact, the last we heard of Black Lauren, when they were on the stony shore, and Theon was trying to kind of puff Dagmar up a little bit, talk him up to butter him up so that he'd go along with his plan. He told Dagmar that you're the most skilled swordsman and spearman on the Iron Islands, and Dagmar said not anymore. And he mentioned 3 names, and one of them was Black Lauren as one of the most skilled swordsmen and spearmen and most feared and dreaded on the islands. So yeah, would not be great for him to be the new Lord of Winterfell.
Yeah. So on the road, Theon thinks about the implications if Asha finds out about the boys' absconsion, and he thinks that he'd sooner have them dead than to be thought of as foolish. Which certainly she will think him foolish if he allows these kids to escape.
Yes, he is absolutely terrified of Osha finding out about him losing these boys. He must mention it or think it to himself 5 times in this chapter. What is Osha going to think? What if Osha finds out?
Right. Well, but I mean, of course, he sees her as a rival for his father's affections and ultimately for the throne. So he needs to not come second to her here. And right now, he sees himself as having taken a step up above her because he took Winterfell while she was terrorizing Deepwood Motte.
Yep.
But if she gets to Winterfell and she finds the debacle with the most prized possession being Maester Luwin, she's going to turn around, ride home, and tell everyone what an idiot her brother is.
Yeah. Probably going to say it was a bad idea to try and take a castle with not nearly enough men to hold it.
So
Maester Luwin, a surprise possession.
Who else is there?
Old Nan.
And we've got the
best
Kennel Master's
storyteller
daughter.
in Westeros. Man.
Luwin, coming back to Luwin, actually, he's actually giving Theon good counsel. I mean, as the Maester ought to do to the Lord of the castle.
Yeah.
There's still no doubt where his loyalties lie. He makes no real pretense of not favouring the Starks. But
no, in fact, it's very smart the way that he plays on Theon's personal connections with the boys in Hodor. Any other conqueror, if this was Osha, she wouldn't care who Hodor is, and so he uses what he has at his hands here. The fact that there's a personal connection between Theon and these people. So, but Theon says, the boys have more value to me alive than dead.
Right.
So, he's not planning on killing them at this point anyway. Yeah. But like we've discussed earlier, there's the catch-22.
Yes. The short term, he needs to keep them alive. Long term, he cannot survive as Lord of the North with them still alive. Unless he can somehow keep them forever as, hostages. But that just seems...
which seems unlikely.
He hasn't managed to get through a week, and they're both children.
They've already escaped him once. Yeah.
But then Luwin tries to make sure that the boys in Hodor will be safe, but he totally abandons Osha as an oath breaker. And I couldn't decide if that was a sort of Ned-like inflexibility from Luwin, or just a lack of care for Osha, or was he just trying to make, sort of palliate what he was asking Theon for with this sort of other side of it? I'm sure you're going to want to kill someone for this. Well, the person to kill is Osha because she's betrayed.
Right. Yeah. That very well could be. I thought maybe it was him not wanting to push Theon too far.
Right.
He'd already gotten the Stark boys, the Reeds, and Hodor, and he was, when Theon made it clear, don't even try to convince me not to kill Osha.
Right.
He was like, okay.
But the one thing I will say is, it also would make sense if Luwin was confident they were going to escape. If Luwin was confident they were going to escape, that he sounds more plausible saying that. If he thinks they might get captured, he might not say that because he doesn't actually want Osha to die. But maybe he's been involved in the planning of this and is confident they'll get away.
Yes, that's
allowing
a very good
him
point.
to talk the talk.
Right, yeah. It makes him much more credible if he doesn't look like he only has the Stark boys' interest at heart. Yeah. But, you mentioned that Luwin is giving good counsel here, which I agree, he definitely does. But, the perfect opposition to Luwin's good counsel is Reek's flay them all counsel. So, you've got this good, wholesome counsel coming from Luwin on one side, and Reek's, let's terrorize these people counsel. So it just, you've got two very different voices coming into Theon's ears.
On Theon's shoulders, yes. So So Wex Pike, who we mentioned is Theon Squire, so just a reminder of who he was Sargon Botley's bastard child. He became Theon Squire as part of the deal that gave Theon Swain Botley's horse, Smiler, on the Iron Islands. Remember, he was riding around on a horse called Smiler. Wex is mute, but he seems like quite a sharp kid. It was he, as you mentioned, that noticed the lack of Hodor's footsteps at the river in the soft mud. They could see the wolf's footsteps, but Hodor's, which obviously would be heavier, especially because he's carrying Bran, had left no footprints. He had not been there.
Right.
So,
yeah.
He also, just one thing I read back on Wex when we saw him before, we saw him when Asha played the trick on Theon, pretending not to be someone else. And Wex knew all along and kind of laughed at Theon and got smacked around the head for it. So yes. I kind of like Wex, and I'm going to keep an eye on him for the future.
Yeah, and he's probably also a voice in Theon's ears, but not his ears per se.
No, yes. He's not going to listen to him, I tell you that for free.
No. Well, things do not go well during the hunt. They come up empty-handed, and Theon thinks if he comes back to Winterfell without the boys, he might as well just show up wearing motley. And it's definitely... It's not a good look being outsmarted by that particular party, which contains Hodor and 4 children.
Right.
So it's not going to help him on any of the fronts. The Winterfell people, the North at large, and the Ironborn, including his family, are all probably going to look at him differently if he fails so miserably at this.
Yeah, I mean, he was overconfident that he was going to catch them, but I kind of understood it. They were on foot, and even if they had horses waiting for them outside, he was going to be on horseback, and he wasn't a child, and they had tracking dogs. They were going to catch them, apart from this trick, which somehow has got them away.
Yeah, it fits with the standard process that Theon goes through. He begins with an overestimated optimism for himself and full over confidence in his abilities, and then things just go poorly for him. We saw it when he arrived at Pike and he thought he was going to be the new prince, and it turned out that his dad had very little regard for him. We saw it when he thought he was going to take Winterfell and become the Lord of the North, and it was going to be no big deal. That hasn't gone as he envisioned it, and now we see it here with this hunting party. So it seems to be the process that he goes through.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. I might look out for that. I remember that we felt that Jon chapters were often the same kind of, like, Jon makes silly proclamations and then wiser heads tell him to behave himself when he came back down. And that kind of happened over and over again on a pattern. There might be a pattern forming for Theon here as well. We'll keep an eye out for that.
Right.
So Reek thinks the boys are hiding at some random mill with the family who runs it. He stopped there on the way to Winterfell. Theon questions how he could know that. And again, this goes to you, can he trust anyone? Because maybe Reek knows where the boys are somehow.
Right.
But Reek says that answer is beyond knowing, which is kind of cryptic and not very helpful. If I was the boss, I would be like, all right, I want straight answers every time.
Yes.
So
that answer's not going to fly.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. In the sack he's been carrying, he's got some clothing and a wolf head brooch. And Theon understands what this means. Before we came on air, Mackelly and I debated whether or not we could reveal this. And I think we can, and Mackelly thinks we can't. So we're not going to. But when you all write in and say, duh...
Well, there might be some folks out there who don't put these pieces together.
It is hard. It's hard. As I read it, it didn't make it clear to me. But then as I thought about it afterwards, I was like, well, what else could it be? It's a brooch with a wolf's head on it. It's a symbol of the Starks. Okay. But it does seem that Reek is quite sharp and quite a plotter.
Yeah.
So it does explain perhaps why Ramsay Snow kept him around, because despite his malodorousness, because he's
right.
He's got some good ideas.
He does. It's a little bit surprising that this guy whose name is Reek is quite clever and
Yeah.
seems to think things through and think ahead pretty well. I see. Apparently, thinks ahead further than Theon does.
Right, and especially like we said, especially because this was a contingency that he was coming up with, not just this is what we will do. It was like if things go a certain way, we'll need this, and I'll bring it just in case.
Right. That takes an extra level of planning there. But then the chapter ends with Luwin reminding Theon of his promise of mercy to the boys, and Theon says, "That was this morning. That was before they made me angry," which is rather ominous for the safety of the Stark boys, but unless this brooch in some way proved to Theon that the boys did indeed go to the mill, if he doesn't have them, he can't harm them.
True.
So,
true.
Yeah.
We'll see. Do you have some background for us?
I do have some background. I had to dig a little bit, but I came up with something.
You always do.
Theon told... What's that?
You always do.
I try my best anyway. So Theon told Septon Shale that he and his gods had no place in Winterfell now, before they pushed him into the well as a sacrifice to the drowned gods. And that is true. The faith of the Seven is not very prevalent on the Iron Islands. The vast majority of the Ironborn worship the drowned god. However, that's not always been the case necessarily. Once upon a time, there was a king of the Iron Islands known as Harmon Hor II, aka Harmon the Haggler. Now, Harmon spent his youth as a ward of House Lannister in Casterly Rock. He was a big fan of travel. In fact, Harmon was thought to be the first king of the Iron Islands to visit the mainland of Westeros in peace. And when he became king, he married Lady Laelia Lannister, who was the daughter of the King of the Rock, which I think might make her Princess Laelia, but whatever. At first, King Harmon followed both the drowned god and the faith of the Seven, referring to the 8 gods rather than the 7, considering the drowned god as the 8th god. However, after opposition from septons and priests of the drowned god, Harmon relented and claimed the drowned god was actually an aspect of the stranger. As his kids were raised in the faith of the Seven, when his oldest son, Harmon III, aka Harmon the Handsome, succeeded him on the...
blood.
That's right, yeah. Bet he had golden locks, too. When he succeeded him on the Seastone chair, he continued the practice of worshipping the Seven. However, Harmon III took things a step further. He outlawed reaving and taking salt wives, and he opposed the taking of thralls. Those moves did not sit well with many of the Ironborn. A priest of the drowned god, known as Shrike, led a rebellion, and Harmon was not just dethroned, but his body was mutilated, having his eyes, tongue, and nose removed. Ew. Harmon's brother, Hagon Hor, took the throne and restored traditional Ironborn practices after that. Harmon, still alive though disfigured, was confined to the dungeons of Hor Castle. Their mother, Laelia, was also mutilated and returned to Casterly Rock. This led to a war with House Lannister, and after 7 years of fighting, the Westermen eventually conquered Great Wick. Sir Aubrey Crakehall considered restoring Harmon to the throne, who had been rotting in a dungeon all this time and was now considerably less handsome. However, instead he decided to give the gift of mercy to Harmon.
Well, thank you. Interesting. I'd never heard that tale before.
Me either. I thought it was pretty cool.
So, comparison with the television show, we watch the escape happen. This is not from Theon's perspective. We actually see the escape happen, including Osha seducing the guard. And in fact, it was Osha that was sleeping with Theon. She sneaks out of Theon's bed, seduces the guard, kills him.
Wow, she's busy.
Again, and so when Theon awakes, his bed is empty, and that's his first suspicion in the show.
Okay, I follow it. Yep.
Again, the Reeds have not joined the show yet, so it's just the foursome: Bran, Rickon, Hodor, and Osha, plus the 2 direwolves. The whole Theon trying to win over the citizens aspect is skipped. He beats up one of his men for allowing the escape. Black Lauren, in fact, is who he beats up. And it's just him, Luwin, and the Ironborn hunting. There's no sort of like debating with the people of Winterfell.
All right.
He does have the conversation with Luwin about not killing the children. There is no Reek. Indeed, Ramsay Snow is still alive in the TV show. Because just recently Roose Bolton was talking about appointing his bastard to some position somewhere. So he's still alive in the TV show.
Right. Okay.
They happen upon the mill together, and they meet the Miller and family. And then Dagmar is there, and he raises an eyebrow to suggest something to Theon, who then sends Luwin back home. So the same plan is hatching, but Reek was not there to suggest it.
All right.
So
good stuff.
Pedantry, it's just a character decision, and character decisions are always those characters' decisions. But if Theon's been there for a few days and the wolves have howled relentlessly, I'd be surprised if he hadn't already killed them. Seriously.
It's a good point. Either muzzle those wolves or
and you know what?
Take them out.
The citizens of Winterfell would not rise up against him for that. They'd be like, oh, thank God.
Thank God. Thank the gods.
But yeah, it's a character decision. You know, maybe he just felt that he should keep the direwolves around. But the one...
Very astute pedantry. I like that.
The other one I had was the butchering the deer, the butchering the elk. So, they were an hour outside the walls of Winterfell when that elk was brought down by the direwolves. Do you not think they might have packed just a little bit of food for this journey? They're hungry already? Least... How many times have they stopped?
A light picnic or something.
Right. I mean, Hodor's a big fella. He can get through a bit, but, you know. Hodor saw that elk. He was like, oh, come on, let's stop.
Come on. We need to eat. It's been an hour.
So that just never made any sense to me, that you wouldn't need food at that point. And it's the direwolves. They'll kill deer and elk all along the way. You can get one later.
That's a good point. Yeah.
News and notes. George Martin has seen a rough cut of the first episode of House of Dragon and loved it. It's dark, it's powerful, it's visceral, just the way I like my epic fantasy. So, right up there in the most anticipated shows of 2022, along with Lord of the Rings, of course.
Right.
And they're going to be a good year for us nerds.
Most anticipated show. How about that? In 2022, the two most anticipated shows are House of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings.
Well,
yeah. A lot of fantasy folks out there. In other news, just a reminder that Spotify is now allowing you to rate podcasts. So please go out and rate us on Spotify. Other A Song of Ice and Fire podcasts are getting rates. We want to keep up with them. So
no, we want to leave them in the dust is what we want to do.
We'd want to leave them in the dust, exactly. We certainly don't want to fall behind them. So it's time for you all to do your part. 51% of our total listener base is on Spotify. So get out there, take but a second, just swipe your finger across to 5 stars, and we will be forever grateful for that.
That'd be great.
So please do that right now while you're listening. So rather than a review today, we actually got a listener email from a listener named Malaku. And the subject line was, if there was a great council for the best Game of Thrones podcast, you had my support.
Oh, wow.
So
I would ensure that they were on that great council then.
That's right. So the message goes like this. First of all, I want to congratulate you guys on a great podcast. From the first minute I started listening to the prologue of Game of Thrones, I was convinced that I found the right podcast for the book series. I had tried a few of the others, but yours was the one standing out to me. That's fantastic. I come from the Netherlands, so English is my second language, and I'm not perfect in speaking, reading, or writing English. Nevertheless, I started reading and finished the books in English because, in my opinion, it's so much better than when it's translated to Dutch. Therefore, I have missed some things that have happened in the books, and your podcast is helping me relive it and understand it so much better. I've also created a Discord account to join your community, and I'm looking forward to the episodes to come and join the conversation in Discord. So a big thanks from the Netherlands for your great work. Keep it up.
Well, thank you, Malaku. That's awesome. We'll see you on the Discord server. That'll be fun to catch up with you. I will say, actually,
thank you very much.
Like all Dutch people, they played down their quality of their English while delivering perfect English.
I was thinking that while I was reading this. I was like, this is perfectly written.
My wife maintains 100% cast iron truth that Dutch people speak English better than English people do. She can't understand anything English people say, but Dutch people speak perfectly. So. Yeah.
Wow. Yes. Well, it certainly holds true in this instance. So thank you very much. That was a beautiful email, and we really appreciate that.
So let's conclude. So there's real trouble for Theon now. If he cannot recapture the boys, then his only leverage in the perilous ownership of Winterfell is gone. I mean, all he's got left is threats now.
Yeah, at that point, what is preventing any force from just doing whatever necessary? Right. I mean, like just torch the place to get inside if necessary. Yeah. So, yeah.
Reek's becoming a character. He's smart and clearly fairly ruthless, it seems. I mean, certainly what he was willing to do to extract pointless information out of people was pretty brutal.
Yeah, he seems much deeper than just some stinky small folk sidekick. So, like you said, you could see why Ramsay kept him around, why he seemed to be fond of him. I mean, he certainly seems more than just a wallflower background character.
Yeah.
He's starting to develop a persona of his own here. And it also, like you said, he's smart. So, he was the sidekick of the heir to the Dreadfort, so maybe he picked up some education along the way as well.
Certainly some brutality.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Just did not pick up much in the way of hygiene, apparently.
No. So he's the polar opposite to Luwin. So Theon's hearing awful advice and good advice. Luwin convinced Theon to spare the boys, but then once he got angry with them, he said all bets were off. He said that was before they made me angry. So, but again, he's still got to think about the leverage that they bring him, and I can't imagine killing the boys is the right thing to do here. But hey,
no.
POV characters are not safe.
Right. Yes, we've come to learn that. That's for sure.
It's very clever of Osha to mislead the hounds with the wolves, of course, because the hounds. It didn't really occur to me as they were leaving, but the hounds would follow the wolves' smell. I mean, that's the obvious smell to follow, and all you have to do is just jump off the path in a different direction, and they would not notice you going because they follow that wolf smell.
Yeah, and that is the smell that they were sent on.
Right.
Theon says, are you sure they're not following the wrong wolves? And Farland says, no, they know the smell of Shaggy and Summer, so that's the scent that they were following. But I do wonder if it was all Osha on her own. Little Walter thinks that the Reeds have some part to play in all of this. He says that they're not like other people, and then Luwin agrees and says that Crannog men grew close to the children of the forest in the olden days. So, and that maybe there is some secret knowledge that these Crannog men have. So, I don't know, could little Walter be right?
I've been giving Osha too much credit, perhaps. Yes, good point. I hadn't thought about the fact that Reeds might have been involved. So we don't want to say what Reek is suggesting with the furs, the brooch. Can it help? Can it really benefit Theon? We'll have to see. And
right, it doesn't seem to be a plan to get the boys back yet. Well, I don't know. Maybe he's gonna hawk that brooch, and then they'll be outraged at.
Wolf said,
"That's my brooch."
Wolf said, "Brooch for sale." Oh, it's drawn me out of my hiding place. I gotta have it.
Right.
If Bran and Co do escape, what next for them? They appear to have eluded immediate recapture, but where do they go from here? Greywater Watch, the Wall, another northern town?
Yeah, as long as one of the options isn't Deepwood Mott.
That would be the bad
choice. Or Moat Cailin.
Yes, those are not the places to go. Yes.
Right. But I wonder if maybe all of this happened when it did because Jojen had another dream or something, that said we got to do this, so we got to do this now. Like the timing of it.
Interesting.
Could be
Yeah.
based on a dream that Jojen has recently had. We don't know. We haven't talked to Bran in a few chapters, so we'll see.
Yep.
As always, you can reach us at ghost.harrenhall@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter @GhostHarrenhall, or on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Discord.
And there's 3 ways you can help us. First and foremost, go out and leave us a review. There's no better advertising than that. Secondly, you can buy some merch at ghostsofharrenhall.threadless.com. Or lastly, you could buy us a cup of Arbor Gold at www.buymeacoffee.com/ghostsharrenhall. Big thank you to those who've already become sustainers. Very good of you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.